Hi, everyone. My name is Esther Hyun, and I am the director of the Young Lawyers Division Diversity and Inclusion Team. The Diversity and Inclusion Team and the Affiliate Assistance Team are excited to sponsor today's program, creating a racial justice coalition for systemic change. In response to national discussions surrounding racial injustice, inequality, and police brutality, many young lawyers and bar associations across the country have stepped up and taken action to create meaningful change and reform in our communities. In Chicago, the Chicago Bar Association Young Lawyers Section formed the Racial Justice Coalition for the purpose of collaborating with leading forces in the legal community to take action against racial injustice through service, community engagement, and education. Over 30 local and minority bar associations and legal advocacy groups have joined the newly created Racial Justice Coalition. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from our speakers about how the Racial Justice Coalition was created and how other young lawyers and organizations can implement a similar coalition in their community. Our speakers today are Chastity, Kenny, and Martin. Chastity has been an assistant public defender in the law office of the Cook County Public Defender since July of 2013. Kenny is an associate counsel in Neil Gerber and Eisenberg's Intellectual Property and Technology Transactions Practice Group. And finally, Martin is a trial attorney at Romanucci and Blandon LLC, where he works in the firm's complex litigation and catastrophic injury group. Welcome, Chastity, Kenny, and Martin.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having us. We're really happy to be here to be able to talk about the Racial Justice Coalition and hopefully encourage a lot of you out there to start your own. So as Esther was saying, our inspiration for starting the Racial Justice Coalition was really, we wanted a way to respond and to help and to do something good as a result of the horrible killings that we saw over the summer, especially Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. We wanted to express the fact that our local bar association stands against racial discrimination and against police brutality. And we knew that there were a lot of other organizations, nonprofits, and bar associations in our area that felt the same and that really wanted to use their voices and their resources and their members to affect change in this area. So what we did was we got everyone together around some central themes, and we decided that together we would be more effective in making a difference. Our Racial Justice Coalition is comprised of three main components. We separated our mission statement that way to be more effective and to form different committees that would focus on different projects and initiatives that we wanted to put into action. So first, we have the service component. And with this component, we collaborate with other bar associations and organizations to identify and facilitate pro bono and community service opportunities. And those service opportunities are focused on, of course, combating racial disparities and addressing the concerns of diverse minority groups, as well as just connecting the legal community more so with the clients that we serve. Second, we have the community engagement component. And with that, our goal is to basically build and maintain relationships with different community organizations that have a similar mission to us, and with local government leaders that are also seeking to promote social justice and to lift up historically underprivileged voices. So we basically want to, through this component of our mission statement, support legislation that is aimed at eradicating systemic racism. And finally, we have an education component. And with that component, we're encouraging the organizations that partner with us to come together with us to put on training and seminars, different speaker series and workshops that are dedicated to diversity and inclusion and to encouraging understanding diversity within our communities and within the profession.
All right, so starting off with just service, some past events that we've had that you can kind of use as a model. So one thing to note is that all of our events so far have been virtual. and via Zoom. So we started back in October with our first service event. We had a pro bono opportunity where we partnered with the Center for Elder and Disability Law, a public interest organization here in Chicago that works with senior citizens of all kinds and all backgrounds to put on basically a power of attorney workshop. And we partnered with the nonprofit organization My Block, My Hood, My City, which is an organization that within Chicago focuses on empowering and providing opportunities for youth within Chicago's west and south sides, and also with senior citizens as well. So some programs that they've done recently is having drives for personal protective equipment for the COVID-19 pandemic, where volunteers have been able to drop off with social distancing, PPE kits and just other materials that senior citizens may need directly to their homes just by driving up. So we worked together because we knew that there's a lot of issues with, say, as a lot of senior citizens in low income and certain minority neighborhoods, is that they don't often have access to estate planning or with wills, trusts, even something as simple as powers of attorney. And that was something that's an important component to creating generational wealth, to ending systemic inequality. So we actually worked together where My Block, My Hood, My City actually recruited a few of their senior citizen members to work together. And from there, we actually, through the phone and via Zoom, worked together to help them fill out just some basic powers of attorney. So it was something that we were able to serve a lot of people, and we're actually interested. It went so well, we might actually do it again in the spring with the Center for Elder and Disability Law. One thing that we're trying to do too is that with some of these service opportunities through community service or pro bono opportunities, is that law students are encouraged to get involved, because this is an activity that you can kind of directly make change in. So for example, with our power of attorney clinic, we actually had a few law students as volunteers, some who were externs for the Center for Elder and Disability Law who had some background knowledge, others who just wanted to get involved and worked with an attorney to help the senior citizen fill out their forms. So it's very much encouraged for law students to do that. And we're currently working on our next big service opportunity, and we're hoping to partner with DePaul University's College of Law, at least with some of their law students who are interested in getting involved. More opportunities about that will be coming up, but I'll let Marty talk a little bit about some of what we've done with community engagement and some events that you can adapt.
Thanks, Kenny. So just to piggyback on what Kenny said, the CBA's position on the Racial Justice Coalition has always been, we're stronger together. There's many different organizations that have that same idea, that they want to see changes in the way police interact with certain communities, and they want to see racial justice. And together, when you mobilize all these different organizations for a common goal and to create a concrete agenda, it can be far more effective than if everybody does it themselves. And with that, the grassroots aspect of it's very important, but we also have to get buy-in from local leaders, and we have to also educate people on what the issues are. So one of our first events was we had U.S. Senator Dick Durbin come on and do a panel with us to explain to us essentially what was going on in Congress regarding racial justice. There was a Justice in Policing Act of 2020. There was a Democratic version of that bill that was created in the House. And then there was a competing Republican version of that bill in the Senate. And many people really didn't understand, what were the issues that were being discussed in those two bills? Where was their common ground, and where were their differences? Some of those issues that were being discussed were the requirement to have all police officers carry body cameras. And this goes both ways. In many circumstances, it's a he said, she said. And the justice system and the public, people need to know what happened. There's a lot of gray there. And initially a lot of law enforcement agencies were against that. They didn't want to have body cameras every time they interacted with the public. I think that mindset has begun to change. Many police officers say, you know what, sometimes body cameras can have a calming effect on citizens that they interact with when they know they're being recorded, or it can provide clarity regarding what happened. Same thing on our end, when it comes to a criminal defendant who might have been wrongfully charged with something. I had a case where a homeless man was beaten up at a Metro stop, and they charged him with aggravated battery against an officer. They said he initiated the altercation. He sat in Cook County Jail for 18 months, refused to plead guilty, and eventually a video camera surfaced where it showed that his story was right. He was not the aggressor, and he was essentially, the charges were dismissed, and the Cook County State's Attorney's Office began investigating the officer involved. I wish we had that circumstance in every case. So that's an important issue that we'd like to see change, and it's an issue that's being discussed in the Justice and Policing Act. I think there's more buy-in from both sides of the aisle on that. Chokeholds. Another thing that Senator Durbin discussed is whether or not, we're going to do away with chokeholds, or if officers can use chokeholds, what type of restrictions do we need in place to ensure people aren't wrongfully killed with their interactions with police. Qualified immunity issue in civil cases. Currently, it's very difficult to bring civil rights cases against officers, and there's certain types of offenses, unless you find a prior lawsuit, essentially having the similar facts as your case where there was found to be excessive force, it's difficult to proceed to the next step in these cases because of qualified immunity. So that's an issue. How to training. Another thing that has come up in Chicago especially is de-escalation training. Until recently, when the Department of Justice investigated the Chicago Police Department, there really was no de-escalation training across the department, which is just unfathomable. Same thing with how to handle emotionally disturbed people. That when you're interacting with someone who's suicidal, it's a different type of training and response that you have than you would if you were interacting with somebody who, may have just committed a certain crime and you're trying to just arrest them. So the training aspect is an important issue, and it's being discussed on a federal level. It's also being discussed on a local level. And understanding those issues helps you become a better advocate for racial justice because you understand what changes need to be made. And as much as I read about it, or Chastity or Kenny read about it, we're probably not going to have the same insight as Senator Durbin will. So to have him on a panel, one, it drew in a lot of people that wanted to hear what he had to say, but it also was very educational in terms of understanding what the issues were and also what the politics were behind it. And because it was an election year, essentially whatever the bill was going to be, it was going to be put on hold until the election was over. That was the gist of what we could anticipate going forward. So, I think creating events like that can draw a lot of people into the organization, generate interest, and it also helps you understand the issues.
So
on a more local level, we brought in some aldermen that were proposing bills to change local policing matters and local accountability matters. So we had an alderman, Matt Martin, who was very involved in law enforcement committees within the Chicago City Council. We brought him on a panel to explain what two competing local ordinances were. There was something called CPAC, the Civilian Police Accountability Council, and then there was something called GAPA. It was the grassroots. I'm forgetting now what it is, but essentially it was another proposed, organization that would be involved with police accountability. A lot of police advocates in the city were trying to take away the Chicago Police Department's and the city's role in reviewing police misconduct complaints because there was an arguable conflict of interest. where you have the organization that was supposed to be policing the police, had many ex-Chicago police officers that were heavily involved in it. They had a lot of close connections to local law enforcement. And the thought was that they couldn't be as objective as they would be if it was entirely run by civilians that didn't have a connection to that local law enforcement. So we brought in a local alderman who talked about those issues as well as the local politics. We also brought in a religious leader from the south side of Chicago, Father Flager, who is a well-known advocate, and he had his own perspective on what some of the problems were locally in Chicago with how the police interacted with certain communities in Chicago on the south side and on the west side. So I think hearing about those perspectives was helpful for us to understand where are we going to allocate our energy. And from that, the next step was essentially, well, where do we go from here? What can we do as an organization that's mobilized all these different organizations within the city? How can we help? And internally, the thought was, well, the best way to make changes is to essentially change the law. And that's one of the best ways to force change in when you're operating in an environment that's been fighting for the status quo for so long. And so our Racial Justice Coalition is putting together mail writing or letter writing campaigns, asking people to write to their aldermen, write to their congressmen, write to their senators, asking for them to support the U.S. and Policing Act in what issues, support certain issues that we thought were important, doing the same thing locally. And that's essentially where we're at now. We put on a lot of events. There's still a lot to be done. But I highly encourage whoever any of you that are thinking about creating a racial justice coalition to get buy-in from local politicians. If you can get that buy-in, it's one of the most effective ways to helping push for real changes.
So one thing too that Marty mentioned was that there are certain ways that, so we've had a lot of local leaders, but even beyond, you can actually cross engage like community leaders with, say, with service or education. So one thing that we're doing now for the holiday season is, so with Father Flager, so he is the priest for a predominantly African-American church in the south side of Chicago in the Auburn Gresham neighborhood called St. Sabina. So they are having a coat drive where what they're doing now is they're collecting cold weather clothing items for the St. Sabina Catholic Charity Social Services Center. So everything will be, because of the pandemic, delivered remotely to St. Sabina, and all that will go directly to people from nearby shelters to help them get through the cold winter. So it's something that there's ways that we can kind of work together. Like, we only just met Father Flager back in October, but now we're kind of finding ways to kind of work together, both at the local level to help out a lot of people who might have a very difficult winter with everything. So if you are interested in helping out, there is an Amazon wish list page. So if it is something that interests you, at least just helping out with the local level, I'm just going to post it in the chat. So generally anything is appreciated, whether it's gloves, hats. It's something that we figured that it's just kind of important to just kind of figure out ways you could kind of interact with everybody and just also continue to develop your relationships, especially with some other organizations like Mothers Opposed to Violence Everywhere.
Yeah, so in addition to the service and the community engagement piece of your potential racial justice coalition, I would definitely encourage you to include an education component. A lot of the buy-in with the education component, at least for the attendees of our events and programs, is that we include continuing legal education or CLE credit with a lot of those programs, and all lawyers need that, right? So basically with this component, what we've been doing is we've been putting on things like practice basics seminars and different panels that educate people in the profession and the community about the legal ramifications and about the legal concepts of some of the issues that they're seeing in the news that affect racial justice and the criminal justice system. But we're also talking a lot about why diversity and inclusion is important and how it affects everybody's individual lives. So just for example, a couple of the programs that we did through our education component, one was the Cultural Competency Practice Basics Seminar. And we catered that one towards young attorneys who are just getting into the profession and are thinking a lot about the model rules of professional conduct, how they affect them, how they're going to affect their practice. And what we did was we brought in panelists who spoke about the definition of cultural competency, why it's important, and why attorneys need to develop cultural competency in order to be ethical and to comply with the model rules. So we brought in a managing partner from a law firm. We also brought in a panelist from the Illinois Attorney Registration and Disciplinary Commission for this panel, as well as a general counsel from the Illinois Supreme Court Commission on Professionalism. And they gave a fantastic presentation about how the model rules of professional conduct apply to some of these concepts of racial equality and diversity and inclusion. And then second, another program that we did recently was the intersection of prosecutorial ethics and race. So this one was big, and we collaborated with one of our racial justice coalition partners, the Hispanic Lawyers Association of Illinois. And we did a discussion about what the public's general perception of the job of a prosecutor is versus what we think it should be in keeping with advancing racial justice in the community and improving the criminal justice system, focusing on rehabilitation rather than punitive effects. So we had 2 Cook County Assistant State's Attorneys on the panel, and then we also had the Director of Programming at Prosecutorial Impact in Boston on the panel. And he actually goes around the country and does trainings for prosecutorial offices to teach them about diversity and the importance of advancing racial justice within their offices and within their court systems. So we provided continuing legal education credit for that program as well, and just focused on Rule 3.8, which in Illinois talks about the role of the prosecutor and thinking about racial justice and culture and cultural competency and making charging decisions and in sentencing and in working with defense to make sure that there's an eye towards restorative justice and towards making sure that the relationship between prosecutorial actors and law enforcement is used to improve relations in the community. So those are just a couple examples of the education programs that we put on throughout the year. And now I think Kenny is going to talk to you about kind of a checklist as far as how to logistically start your racial justice coalition if you want to.
Sure, I would be happy to do that. So now what you've heard a lot about kind of what we've done, all the organizations we've had sign on, but there was a lot of kind of background work that took place with it, just logistically and internally. So one of the things that we wanted to do was to have a very targeted and very precise mission statement and just general goals for what we wanted to do. Because ultimately, that's the best way to make change, is that if you keep laser focused on a single goal, or say you have a few very easy ways to divide certain things, such as with our service, community outreach and education, that's a lot easier to kind of see certain points or to develop programs rather than just having a broad, we just want to end racial injustice. So think about what you want to put on. So what kinds of programs or say pro bono events that you'd want to do, why you want to do it. Is this something that you really are, is this something that you think you can implement? Is it something that you really kind of just want to do? Is this a problem that you're seeing within your community? Then there's the how. So how are you going to do this? So COVID-19 has really impacted a lot of it. So at least the Chicago Bar Association, we've had to be entirely virtual this year. So some activities which would be a little bit easier to plan in person, we've had to kind of figure out ways, how can we do this virtually via Zoom or just through some other platform? So we've kind of found ways to work around it, such as having telephone, or at least with our powers of attorney, having people use Zoom and then training people beforehand how to do it. And just and who. So ultimately, you kind of have to consider which each background is. So sometimes you'll want to target attorneys, say if there's continuing legal education components. Sometimes you're going to want to do public outreach yourself. Each event, you're going to kind of have to figure out who your audience is, and you'll have to tailor your content accordingly. Second, you're going to have to draft a mission statement. The mission statement is probably one of the most important things that you're going to do, because it's going to be one of the first things that people see. And a mission statement should be concise and it should be clear. So our first paragraph mentions that the Chicago Bar Association Young Lawyers section unequivocally stands against racial discrimination and police brutality. We also reaffirm our commitment to serving as a voice and instrument of change in our communities and beyond. In solidarity with everyone who has felt and continues to feel the frustrations of ongoing systemic and institutional racism, we established the CBA YLS Racial Justice Coalition. As attorneys and leaders in the legal profession, we have a duty to unite and use our resources and power to promote unity and progress. Together, we are stronger. And then that includes our 3 pillars, where we explicitly identify what service, community engagement, and education means, who we're going to be outreaching to, what types of events we will do, and the impact we hope to have. So something short, your mission statement should be maybe 1 page or less, and it should kind of be something that is short, sweet, and to the point, because you want people to understand this is exactly why we're doing this, and here's how we're going to do this. You're next going to want to designate certain directors and committee chairs. So Chastity and I co-founded the RJC, and that's something that kind of what we've done is just through everything we worked with Marty to plan a lot of our events. One thing we've done is that for each of the subcommittees we mentioned earlier, is that we've split it into 3 subcommittees. So I lead service, Marty does community outreach, Chastity education, and what we do is that we've actually we'll have subcommittee meetings once a quarter, because we don't want to overwhelm people, or just because I know that we want to make sure we're focused when we do it, is that we'll then reach out to the coalition members to see if they're interested in attending. And from there, what we'll find is that with upcoming projects, we'll ask the people who attend the subcommittee meetings, are you interested in helping out? Do you have ideas for doing so? And that's something that we can use to effectively split resources. So one subcommittee meeting we had a couple of weeks ago with community outreach, we discussed actually an upcoming project that we're working on with the ABA YLD, where we're going to be drafting a resolution that would propose a ban against no-knock warrants. And what we did during this was discuss the resolution process, and we had volunteers who attended the subcommittee meeting just kind of speak up and say what would they want to do, and we would delegate certain tasks to them. So just to make everything a little bit easier, because it helps reinforce the model that together we're stronger, and it shows that we can kind of use everybody's unique talents to help. Long-term goals. So again, that's kind of figuring out who do you want to serve, what kinds of programs do you want to see, and if, say, you have an overall goal. If, say, for us with the end of the bar year, one thing we're thinking about is is this going to be a continuing ongoing nature within the YLS? Is this going to be a committee? Who's kind of thinking are we gonna just even some basic stuff, thinking long term, how will the coalition be and what will we kind of keep doing is kind of an important thing just to keep doing. Recruiting other organizations. This step is actually pretty easy, because within the Chicago Bar Association, our internal director actually had a list of all the most recent presidents of the various bar associations. So what we did was we sent emails out to each president of each organization, and for some of the organizations who weren't listed, but I knew were around, I generally sent emails out to their current and their past president. And from there, we invited them to join us. And the reception was overwhelmingly positive. Like, I was like, pretty much everybody who responded said yes. I mean, there were some people who just didn't, but partially that could have been because maybe it wasn't a current president or there were other things happening, but the response was overwhelmingly positive. So you would be surprised how many bar associations, like whether it's minority bar associations, whether it's state bar associations dedicated to certain subject matters like intellectual property, for example, are really on board with these types of things. We then worked internally to publish a press release to say that we founded the Racial Justice Coalition, just because that's kind of another way to get your awareness out there in terms of reaching out to the presidents of the bar associations, who in turn can share upcoming events with all of their members to attend. That's something that getting the press release out there, like one of the biggest goals of our coalition is to increase awareness as much as possible. So getting as many eyes on it as possible through press releases, through having presidents of other bar associations promote events or promote the coalition in general, that can only help us. We then had an initial town hall meeting where we had about 25, 26 of the bar associations and law student organizations actually too. So student bars, we've had a few student bar associations agree to be coalition members. So that's something for the law students out there. That's something that you can definitely do too. And we kind of just took some notes about potential ideas for events, hearing just what some of their ideas or what they were already doing were, because we wanted to kind of help them and kind of serve as a signal boost. As a central organization, we could work to say, help promote or amplify, say, a project that, at least within Chicago, that the Black Women's Lawyer Association was doing about voting registration and knowing like voters' rights and everything. We were able to help like create a promotional video about that through connections we had at the CBA go on local TV and just all over social media. Creating a calendar. So this is actually pretty easy with a Google document. So at least what Chastity and I have done is that we've created just a central Google calendar, and generally just based on the number of participants is that sometimes we'll have a few administrators who can add events themselves for upcoming events, or just, it depends upon your bandwidth, but sometimes some bar association leaders prefer just to tell us that, hey, we have an event coming up. Can you add this to the calendar? And that's pretty straightforward. So it's a shared calendar that each coalition member who receives our emails has shared access to, so they can see any and all of our upcoming events. And that's something that's really important. So then finally, we plan, execute, and assess our programs and events. So one thing that we've tried really promoting is making sure that the affiliate bar associations who have signed on to the coalition, that's something that they are encouraged to put on their own events and to talk with us about. And that's something that we found has worked out really well. So they'll like let us know about an upcoming event. We can co-sponsor it, such as with what Chastity had mentioned earlier with the Hispanic Lawyers Association of Illinois. We've also had book club meetings with the Intellectual Property Association of Chicago, or the Women's Bar Association of Illinois itself hosted a 3-part series about race in the law, touching on topics that just like, where do we go from here, talking about these issues with your children and everything. So, and then we kind of acted to amplify that and just evaluate which of our programs we did well, where could we do better, and ultimately figure out just even like the frequency of our events, because ultimately what you want to do is you want to make an impact. So be mindful like when you're planning your event, because sometimes, and I know I experienced this myself, is that there's a lot of energy that kind of goes into starting everything. You feel like, I want to do like everything, like right away, like see if we can do like 15 different things. But sometimes being mindful about the events that might make the most impact and ensuring that those are executed flawlessly will actually go a really long way to working. And along with just trusting your any bar associations, law schools, or even organizations such as an attorney disciplinary committee, what they can do themselves is something that can really help you.
So at this point, I think we can take some questions if we have any.
So I'm going to encourage everyone on this program to submit your questions using the Q&A function. But for now, we received a couple questions before the program began. So I'm going to ask the speakers the questions we received. First question is, how can I encourage diversity, equity, and inclusion when my office has only white attorneys?
Well, maybe we all want to weigh in, but I can start off with that. I think that one of the biggest selling points for diversity in a firm or in a company, especially if you're struggling because everyone is white there, is that diversity is good for business. And everybody, everybody wants their business to be successful. Everyone wants their business to make money and to be profitable, and they want to cater to their clients to make that happen. And the more diverse your staff is, and the more your company supports diversity, the better it'll be. So diverse staff leads to different people with different perspectives and opinions. And we know that that makes a company more successful, brings different ideas to the table. And diversity in hiring brings in different people with different resources and different talents that can make your business stronger.
One thing that you can then do on the internal front is, like, some of this is going to depend entirely on how many years into practice you're in. If you're more junior or you just maybe lateral to a firm, like, you're not going to have much say, or you're not going to have much power. So, I mean, what you can do is, the easiest thing is to talk with somebody you trust, whether it's a mentor, or if your office has like an HR or diversity professional, like, that's the easiest way. But another thing that you can do is, like, suss out your boss's internal, just what their politics are. Like, what do they generally support? Like, go to their bios, see which bar associations and organizations they're a part of. If it seems like they're relatively progressive and liberal, maybe that is something that you can feel a bit more comfortable bringing up with them directly. If you're a more senior lawyer, maybe, or you're more junior partner or something like that, if you feel comfortable, like, bring that up with a partner you work with, or if you know the managing partner, that's something that you can do too. But an easy thing that you can really do is just say, have the firm say have them start by sponsoring certain events that focus on diversity and inclusion. So you could work with, say, a bar association like the Black Women Lawyers Association, such as they recently had a scholarship foundation. There have been firms that have sponsored that in the past, and that's a really easy way to kind of show, like, support. Otherwise, it could just be finding ways to say, hey, like, there's this really interesting pro bono case. Like, is this something that we could have as an opportunity spread throughout the firm or something like that? So, there's lots of ways, whether it's a bit more subtle, that you can kind of use to just kind of do that, whether you're more senior where you feel like you can make that directly, or if you're a bit more junior or new at the firm, when you can kind of do so a bit more subtly.
And I would just, I would echo what Chastity and Kenny said. Every firm is very different. So if you're talking about, if you're a diverse person and you'd like to get hired by a law firm that has, all white males, it's a little different than if you're encouraging, your colleagues to hire more diverse people. And I would suggest, navigating the politics there and seeking out, the right person to approach about this subject. But if you get people involved in various, bar associations that promote diversity or events, I think that's a great segue to raise that issue and raise people's awareness of the lack of diversity. And then just on Chastity's point, if you're a trial lawyer, if you're a trial lawyer in Chicago and a third of the city is African-American, a third is Hispanic, and a third is white, everybody doesn't have the same experiences. People interpret evidence differently. So for you not to have a diverse perspective at the office is a huge disadvantage. I think many clients like to see some diversity with the lawyers that they have represent them. And I think just from a practicality and effectiveness perspective, diversity makes you a better lawyer, and it makes your law firm a better law firm because you understand how other people see things differently. You know, everyone does not see evidence in the same way because they have different experiences. And I think that's a big selling point if you're someone who's advocating that your law firm hire more diverse lawyers. It's better for the firm.
So I saw we had a question come in about whether we had any conflict with or assistance from our big bar, so to speak, if they delegated it to us or if they've remained engaged. And generally, so the Chicago Bar Association, at least as we affectionately call it, the big bar, they've actually been some of our biggest cheerleaders, and they've really supported us throughout, where actually, so a lot of some of the things that we've done have required approval from the big bar, such as what we did. We actually wrote a letter to Mitch McConnell asking for certain action that be taken to vote on legislation. This ABA resolution with banning no-knock warrants, they actually approved it, like, you know, almost like pretty much unanimously, and like super quickly too. It was like within a day we sent the proposal and they rubber stamped it. So we've had a lot of institutional support from the Chicago Bar Association. We have several of the big bar members who are coalition members. Our president, Mariam Ahmad, has really championed us and has really made it her mission this year that she's really kind of helped out with this just through her own projects and really helping us out. So I would say that, yeah, in general, I would say that it'll depend. I would say that you'd be surprised that, say, although YLS has done a lot of the work, we have received a ton of support, and you'd be surprised by how much support, say, the higher ups, even if they're a bit older, will actually give you.
I think this is a good segue to maybe providing some tips for running a coalition. Obviously, one of them is making sure you have support from your local big bar association. Do you have any other tips for the attendees on the call today?
I would say bringing in other stakeholders, other organizations. That's probably the most important thing. I mean, if you're, I don't know how big your bar association is locally, but there's a huge difference between having maybe 50 people in your bar association pushing for some type of systemic change against, a municipality and the mayor and some powerful forces versus having 10 or 15 or 30 bar associations pushing that same issue. So I think getting people to buy into it is one of the most important things. And everybody gets to participate and have credit. Include all the organizations on all your letters. It's not about egos. Everybody gets credit. Everybody's doing work, and you're all fighting for the same goal. So, in our situation, we have, so many different bar associations. They all had all these different good ideas on how they could see change locally. And, we're working with everybody, and we're trying to just keep, from our perspective, one of our biggest jobs is really just keeping people organized, keeping everybody on the same page. So we don't have 50 events that have 10 people participate in each, and have maybe 10 events or 5 events with much greater participation.
Yeah, and on that note, I think that it's important to kind of expand your horizons and not just consider bar associations as partners, but we have some other nonprofits and organizations as partners as well. And I think events that have included them have been some of our most successful. So Kenny talked about us partnering with My Block, My Hood, My City. And we have also, partnered with Father Flager from St. Sabina. Everybody right now, because it's such a difficult time, I think is looking for some way to serve the community and to get involved and engaged with the community. And it's a great day to talk about that. It's Giving Tuesday. But so why not bring those organizations in and combine resources with the legal profession as well as the community organizations, give people an opportunity to volunteer and get involved.
And the
Yeah.
only thing I'd add on that is Chastity and Kenny Kenny have been excellent on bringing in the non-legal organizations, which is important because they also have a different perspective than lawyers. You know, a lot of these organizations have been on the ground level for a long time. They have a foothold in various communities that have a lot of problems that need to change the most. And they're going to tell you, you're going to learn a lot from those organizations, probably more than you would from the other bar associations that you see all the time at the same events, and probably don't live in those communities and have a more bird's eye view of what they think the issues are.
But ask your coalition members too if they know people within the community, like people that we've recently met and talked with, such as with the Black Village Foundation, which was just formed actually by a star of Empire, along with a longtime community organizer here in Chicago. We were made aware of that by one of our racial justice coalition members, who was a member of represented the South Asian Bar Association here in Chicago. And that was something that, like, get them involved, like ask them, do you know people? Do you have ideas? That's important too. But I would say, like, frequency of communications is something that you kind of have to balance. Like, generally what we'll have is usually every month, like, we'll send out an email with, here's all of our upcoming events to just all of our coalition members. Because sometimes people can check the calendar, but it's kind of a good way to check in and just be like, kind of, and just saying, like, here's some of our events, here's how you can register. But also, if you have ideas, please let us know. Please feel free to send us events that your own bar association is putting on that maybe you just haven't had a chance to tell us about yet. So kind of maintaining like not overly frequent communication, but kind of keeping the message of, we're all in this together. Your ideas are just as valid as ours is probably the best way to do that.
Yeah, that reminds me of another question I think that we got ahead of time, which is talking about how to put on virtual events that people are interested in participating in. I think it's really big to make sure that there's some other active component to your programming, and to not just keep putting out programs where people are staring at people on a screen talking at them. So we had the Senator Durbin event as our kickoff event, but we'd also followed that up with a letter writing campaign. Or we did the My Block, My Hood, My City and Center for Disability and Elder Law Advanced Directives workshop, where we're actually engaging with people in the community and kind of giving them some legal advice and helping them write out their will and trust documents. So if there's a way that you can bring an active component into a virtual program, I think those tend to be the most successful. Or even if you're putting people into breakout rooms to have roundtable discussions about some of these racial justice topics. Just the more you can shake up the program and make it more engaging, the better.
And I think this was briefly mentioned during the program, but could you answer, how can law students be involved in the Racial Justice Coalition?
So there's a couple ways that law students can be involved. So some of our signatories have actually been law student bar associations, or their student governments, kind of as a way to sign on and express interest. So if you talk to your law school's student government about if you'd want to maybe take part in a bar associations or even start your own, I mean, that's probably the first and easiest place to start. And then that student bar association can then just send all the emails for the upcoming events. But the others is that we encourage students to take part in anything and everything. So if they have ideas for like community service or community outreach, like, it doesn't matter if you're a student or a practicing attorney. If you have a good idea, like, we've always welcomed that. And we've had law students help volunteer with, say, even our advanced directives, where they worked with an attorney while doing this, but it was actually kind of helpful because the attorney could focus on asking the questions, and the law student, say, for example, could just like take notes with what the senior citizen was saying, or sometimes pipe in if, say, maybe a question was forgotten. So I mean, it's just one of those things that it's generally a broad category, so students can get involved any way they can if they have knowledge of community organizing, if they have ideas for service. I mean, if they want to get their law school involved, like the sky's the limit, honestly. So
Even outreach, Kenny and Chastity are sending emails at, 1 a.m, 3-4 times a week. I mean, there's always things that have to be done. And then, you kind of, lawyers are busy. We're working during the day on our cases, and then we're catching up in the evening and night. So I know from our perspective, I'd love to have, more law clerks or more law students involved. There's promotional things that we need done, following up on various people that we reached out to. So you'd be surprised if there is a racial justice coalition in your, local area, reach out and offer to help. And I'm sure you're going to find people that would love to have you help.
So
And
the
if you're in
next
Chicago,
question-
give us, shoot me an email. I got stuff for you to do.
Freddie never sleeps. He has plenty to
pretty
do.
much.
So the next question is kind of a big question, which is how can we make a meaningful impact in our community regarding racial justice?
That is a big question.
Get involved. I guess I think that's step one. You can think about what needs to change. What are the goals? I think there's broader goals in terms of, policy changes, federal laws that are now being discussed regarding body cameras, chokeholds, no knock warrants, but locally there's plenty of issues. There's probably local advocacy groups that are already fighting for certain issues. So, education, learn about what the issues are and get involved, volunteer. And I think that's probably the best way to do it. Maybe pick one issue that you think is important and focus on that.
Another thing too, oh, go ahead, Chastity.
I was just going to say, as attorneys, I think we're uniquely situated to educate the public about a lot of the things that they see in the news that they may not fully understand. Just like the prosecutorial ethics program we did, a lot of people are angry about the way the prosecutions are going right now, or different indictments that are or not being brought. But a lot of people also don't understand the legal concepts behind those and why it's important to vote for your local prosecutor or to become a prosecutor if you are diverse, or why hiring and what that looks like in prosecutorial offices is important. So the more we educate people about that, the more we inspire them to get involved. And we're the experts on it as the practitioners in the profession. So I think the education piece is really important.
And kind of on that note is that a lot of times is where all you really need to do, I think, with an educational program, sometimes I start with a small goal. All you just need is one person to know about it, or to think about it a little bit differently in terms of, I never thought about it that way. And maybe I can start doing something, because then that leads to a chain reaction where you get a lot of people on their own thinking about these issues, and then maybe on their own or in their offices and everything, kind of like a domino effect. All of these things kind of come about and happen now. You see more so a lot. I think the national discourse, or even the local discourse, has changed, let's say regarding to diversity and inclusion, police reform, that even last year you would not have seen, frankly. And I think part of it's just been by having little opportunities or getting people to think about certain things differently, such as, say, with what is cultural competency, or just kind of realizing that, it's important to do, or what do some of these terms actually mean? Because sometimes it's when you're kind of just starting out, a lot of people, sometimes the language, the vocabulary can be intimidating, or it seems like that there's a lot to do. But sometimes if you start off with the basics, or just think okay, if one person changes, then that really helps. So that's kind of just been what we've at least figured, is by kind of being an umbrella organization, letting the local affiliates just kind of by serving to amplify them, by kind of being just really inclusive in terms of what our content and programming is and who can just really take part. We've done some changes. it could be something where in some cases it could even lead, if say maybe your states don't have a diversity and inclusion CLE credit like Illinois does. I mean, maybe that could even lead to it. There's where if you say have somebody who knows ways to like put pressure or like say maybe have a petition with the Supreme Court about it. So I mean, there's like certain reforms that you make, but sometimes it just comes from like just the smallest of actions, or just by having a good cornerstone.
Also, I think in the diversity and inclusion space, we talk a lot about having a seat at the table. And I think when you have so many voices that come together, like in a racial justice coalition, and you have 30+ organizations signed on, that's a lot of voices. And especially when most of those voices are lawyers, and everyone knows we never shut up, it makes a difference. Who thought we could have gotten Senator Durbin to come and speak at our first event? But that's, this many people coming together around a certain issue is, I think, a force to be reckoned with. So just creating the coalition, bringing people in, getting them to buy in, like Marty's talking about, it makes you a powerful force and can, kind of give you a leg up in getting into the ear of people who do have a seat at the table, like your senators, like mayors, like the aldermen that we've had speak at some of our events. Just the coalition itself, I think, will make a huge difference in your community.
Great. Well, we only have a few minutes left, so I want to ask each of you to, I guess, talk about just one key takeaway that you'd like everyone to take from the program today. We can start with Kenny.
Sure. So I think one thing to take away is that your voice matters more than you think it would. It doesn't matter if you're only a couple years into practice or you're a partner. Like, you'd be shocked by just kind of how if you believe that something should be changed and you kind of keep to that goal, like, you'll be shocked by the ripple waves it will affect and just how many people that you'll end up changing along the way.
And on that note, Kenny's a fairly young lawyer, but amongst a lot of the young lawyers section executives, everyone jokes that Kenny will email anybody. He'll reach out to the president of the United States, to a U.S. senator, to the CEO of McDonald's, and if you don't try, you'll never succeed. If you don't, he may not get email responses from 90% of those people, but one of those people is going to be a high-level executive at a big company who's going to say, you know what, hey Kenny, I'm actually interested to learn more. Can you give me a call? And then once you get buy-in from people like that, whether it's influential law firms locally or nationally or business executives, it starts to snowball. From there, once when we speak to organizations that we think would be interested, we say, hey, look, here are all the other organizations that are interested, and right away people's ears perk up and they start listening. They say, you know what, these guys are serious. I know those law firms. They're the real deal. I know those companies. So you got to try. Just get out there, email 50 different organizations. If a couple say yes, eventually you start building from there.
You can even mention past events too. I just know once starting off with Senator Durbin established a lot of credibility and just a lot of in terms of, hey, we do know people. We've had really important people kind of talk. So if you do it may take time to get somebody who has an influential say your voice, but once you do, it gets a lot easier.
Yeah, and I would just say, just bringing in all these organizations and having a coalition like this, it's very effective. Everybody uniting and joining forces is very effective. As our theme is this year in the Chicago Bar Association, we are stronger together as attorneys.
Great. Well, I want to thank Kenny, Martin, and Chastity for speaking today. If you have any questions, there's a website that you can contact the organization, learn more about what the Racial Justice Coalition is doing. And we hope that you learned a lot today and can take the knowledge and information you learned today and bring it to your communities and create your own Racial Justice Coalition. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for having us, Esther. It was a pleasure and a privilege.
Thanks for quarterbacking all this, Esther. Appreciate it. Take